Week 3 of the fantasy season is already on its way, so you know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break down our must-start defenses and streams that are going to help you guys absolutely dominate Week 3 of the fantasy season. All right, and I want to kick the video off with Thursday Night Football. We will have the Bills hosting the Miami Dolphins. The Bills coming off of a nice defensive day in Week 2 on the road against the Jets, and honestly, a game that I thought the Jets were going to perform offensively, but that did not happen. The Bills only allowed 10 total points. They had 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and only allowed 154 total yards, 13 fantasy points on average on the day. Now, the Bills do sit at 76% rostered, so pretty highly rostered. And they are a team that always gives you a pretty decent floor, but also has some games where they don't show up at all. So they're a frustrating team from a fantasy perspective. And we have to be honest, too, this Bills defense still has some holes, but now we have a very mixed sample size going into Week 3. Week 1, they got absolutely torched left and right by every single position by the Ravens, and then in Week 2, they basically stood their ground against the Jets throughout the entirety of the game, right? I mean, like very, very good. So now in Week 3, like I said, they're going to host the Dolphins, and this is a good opportunity for some turnovers as Tua Tagovailoa did play much better. The Dolphins offense played much better in Week 2 against the Patriots, but he still threw an interception, so now he has 3 interceptions and a lost fumble through the first 2 weeks of the season. So I think that there is opportunity here for turnover, and I kind of talked about this going into Week 2. Like, we're getting so much buzz about, like, the Dolphins season's just over. Like, we're only 1 week into the season, right? Like, we need to maybe pump the brakes here. And the Dolphins still not great in Week 2, but better to say the least compared to Week 1. Ultimately here, there's potential for turnover. The Bills are coming off of a nice game. I do sometimes get worried about Thursday Night Football. You never know exactly what you're going to get on the short week, but ultimately the Bills should be a strong start here in Week 3 of the season. Next up, we have the Packers, who are going to be on the road against the Cleveland Browns in Week 3. Just 4 fantasy points for them in Week 2. No turnovers, but 4 sacks, and held the Commanders to 18 total points and 230 total yards. So I think that this is a much better spot for the Packers in Week 3. We look back, right, Week 1, this defense showed up for you guys against the Lions, putting up 10 fantasy points. And, once again, short week against a good Commanders offense. Wasn't exactly there, but you still saw a lot in this game where it's like, man, this defense is good. Maybe not a great fantasy day, but the defense still overall very good, right? And then this is going to be a good opportunity for turnover in Week 3, going up against Joe Flacco, coming off a game with an interception and a lost fumble. 3 interceptions and a lost fumble through the first 2 weeks of the season. So we do know that the Browns and Joe Flacco are going to come out and throw the football a lot, but the Packers should be able to stifle this run game between Crenshaw Junkins and Dylan Sampson and force Flacco to throw the football. Even if he throws the football 45 times and has some success, the potential for turnovers and interceptions will be there throughout the entirety of this game. So Packers sit at 53% roster. This is a very good defense. I don't know if every single game they're going to be a great fantasy defense, but I would definitely bet in Week 3 against Joe Flacco and company, they're going to have a great opportunity to put up a double-digit performance for you guys and your fantasy teams. Next up, we have the Seattle Seahawks, who will be at home hosting the New Orleans Saints, sitting at 25% rostered, coming off of a 7-point fantasy day in Week 2, also had 7 points in Week 1. 3 sacks against Aaron Rodgers and company. 2 interceptions, held the Steelers to 267 passing yards and 17 total points. They also had 2 interceptions in Week 1 and held the San Francisco 49ers, to 17 total points in Week 1. So the Seahawks just a very safe kind of floor defense on a week-to-week basis. And listen, I don't want to just necessarily say we can stream against Spencer Rattler every single week, because I was really high on the Niners defense last week, and Spencer Rattler came through this past week, finishing with 3 total touchdowns, no turnovers. He did have a fumble, but it wasn't a lost fumble. So he technically has no turnovers on the season, no interceptions, and looked pretty dang good against the Niners. But I think ultimately there's still some opportunity at home for the Seahawks in Week 3 to cause some mayhem against the Saints and potentially have some turnovers, as they've had 4 interceptions through the first 2 weeks of the season, like we said. And at worst, they're a safe floor, and they sit at 25% rostered. Next up, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who will be at home in Week 3 hosting the Houston Texans, coming off of a 8-point fantasy day against the Cincinnati Bengals, where they had 3 interceptions, 3 sacks, and Still gave up 350 total yards and 31 total points, but fortunately for them, Joe Burrow had to exit the game. Jake Browning comes in and throws 3 interceptions, although they still gave up a lot of total yardage and points. But they've been quietly pretty good through the first 2 weeks of the season. 12 fantasy points in week 1 against the Panthers, 8 this past week against the Bengals, and I think they will have some sort of opportunity here against CJ Stroud and the Texans. Once again, I'm recording this before the Texans have played here in week 2 as they are playing on Monday Night Football, but we did see that offensive line for the Texans struggle in week 1, and CJ Stroud be pretty lackluster. So maybe after week 2, Monday Night Football, your opinion here might change. Maybe my opinion will change depending on what Stroud and the Texans do in week 2 against the Bucs. But CJ Stroud, an interception in week 1 and only threw for 188 total passing yards. So we'll see how things shake out, but we're definitely in the streaming category here. The Jags sit at just 3% rostered. If you guys find yourself in a tough spot at the defensive special team slot here in week 3, I think that the Jags could be a sneaky option. Next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts coming off of a pretty bad day against the Broncos defensively. Just 1 fantasy point, allowed 28 total points, 324 total yards, and had just 1 interception. I do think kind of quietly this Colts defense is pretty good. I mean, they had 14 fantasy points in week 1 against the Miami Dolphins. They have 3 interceptions through the first 2 games of the season. And, if you watch that Broncos-Colts game, it was kind of a weird game, and both offenses kept finding ways to produce, but we did see both defenses also find ways to produce and prove themselves as well, even if both teams gave up a fair amount of points. But here in week 3, the Colts will be on the road against Cam Ward in the Tennessee Titans, and Cam Ward's, 3rd total start. I mean, Cam Ward isn't necessarily playing awful by any stretch. He has a lost fumble in each game this year, but no interceptions. But he's also only thrown for 175 or less passing yards in each first 2 games of the season. So there should be opportunity here for a safe floor and the potential for some turnover going up against a rookie quarterback. So, I do like the Colts right now. I think that they are a sneaky defense, at the very least for you guys to be paying attention to as they're going to face Matthew Stafford in week 4, then Geno Smith, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert, not so great, but then Cam Ward again, Aaron Rodgers, Michael Penix. They're going to have plenty of opportunity here, and they have an interesting playoff schedule, getting Jacksonville in week 14. I know it's not the real fantasy playoffs, but it's the week before, so I always like to look at that. Then Sam Darnold, then Brock Purdy or Mac Jones, who knows, probably Brock Purdy, and then Trevor Lawrence again. So I think they're just kind of a sneaky team. Keep an eye on. Definitely, could be based on matchup overall, but they've also looked pretty good through the first 2 weeks of the season. Even if they gave up a fair amount of points this past week, just keep an eye on them is the point I'm making here. If you guys find yourself in the area of needing to stream this week, they're very lowly rostered, and I do think they could put together a very nice fantasy day against Cam Ward in week 3. Next up, we have the Arizona Cardinals coming off of a 14-point fantasy day in week 2 against Bryce Young and the Panthers. Gave up 22 total points, 352 total yards. They did have a forced fumble recovery, and an interception, and a defensive touchdown. So they definitely started to break, towards the end of this game, and almost had another, touchdown potentially scored on them, but they held it together, still got you guys double digits, still got, a mark in every category that we want to see, and ended the game with that Calais Campbell sack. So, all is good in the world if you stream the Cardinals this past week, who bounced back from that week 1 performance where they just had 5 fantasy points against Spencer Rattler, and we were expecting big things. So still encouraging. They're going to play the Niners on the road here in week 3, and Mac Jones looked pretty dang good as the backup quarterback to Brock Purdy in week 2, but I still think that there is opportunity for turnover here. We saw 2 fumbles out of Mac Jones in week 2. One of them lost, and ultimately there should be opportunity here. I will say this, though, that, initially I was a little bit higher on the Cardinals going into this video, but they lost 2 corners in that matchup against the Panthers. They've been suffering quite a few injuries since training camp, and they're getting a bit thinner and thinner. So I think there's opportunity here, but I'm also worried about them at the same time. So I feel like they're risky, but if you already own the Cardinals, you played them the last 2 weeks, I think you can roll with them again in week 3. And I wouldn't quite panic or anything or drop them, because they're going to Sam Darnold in week 4, then Cam Ward in week 5. And then Danny Dimes, who might be the GOAT in week 6, or could also be a player who maybe we can still stream against. I'm not quite sure at this point in the season. So it is a nice, encouraging schedule coming up. We'll see what happens for the Cardinals in week 3. And last but not least, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And once again, I am recording this before Sunday Night Football has been played, so I have no idea how they looked in week 2. They faced the Falcons. I'm not necessarily expecting it to be great or anything more than a floor play. We'll see what they do against Michael Penix. If anything drastic happens, I'll have a pin comment down below. But I do think they will have opportunity against the Bengals at home in week 3 because as Brian Flores defense, they draw things up, they scheme things up, they get after the quarterback, they apply pressure, they are good at blitzing the quarterback. But Jake Browning will be the starting quarterback presumably in week 3 with Joe Burrow dealing with that toe turf injury. Browning, is kind of got some Jameis Winston to him. He threw 241 passing yards this past week, 2 passing touchdowns. He also threw 3 interceptions. So, the Vikings are sitting at 81% roster. They are a highly rostered team, but they are going to walk into some turnover potential here in week 3 of the season, undoubtedly. So I think at worst, they can have a very good floor in this game, but they have a lot of upside with that turnover as well. They're going to face Aaron Rodgers in week 4, then Joe Flacco in week 5 before an early week 6 bye, and facing the Eagles. So I think they're a very, rosterable team. Don't move on from them regardless of what happens on Sunday Night Football. And I think that they will be a strong start in week 3. All right. And then to run through the rest of the schedule here, in case you guys feel like a team was missing or anything, or wondering why I didn't talk about them, I think the Commanders have some sort of opportunity against the Raiders. Maybe my opinion on that will change after the last, game of the week is played between the Raiders and Chargers. But ultimately, the Commanders are just not really a defense that I am looking to stream. I know they played fine in week 1 against the Giants, but then they just had 2 points this past week. Maybe there's a potential for streaming there, but I'm probably staying away. Rams, Eagles, obviously 2 good defenses in this game, but we did see the Rams bend a bit against the Titans this past week. They still had 8 fantasy points. And ultimately, like the Eagles, we didn't talk about them last week because they were playing the Chiefs, and they only had 5 fantasy points. They're a great defense. They're not necessarily a great fantasy defense, which is something really important to remember. Then I do think the Falcons have some sort of opportunity, but once again, they're just not a good defense. They only had 1 fantasy point in week 1 of the season. Maybe if they have a crazy game against JJ McCarthy, my thoughts will change because Bryce Young did have a lost fumble and an interception in week 2, lost fumble in week 1, and 2 interceptions in week 1 as well. So maybe there's opportunity there, but I have a hard time starting really bad defenses, just hoping for the best, right? It's just not part of my strategy and what I, encourage you guys to do. Steelers, Patriots, sure, maybe there's something there, but both these defenses look bad right now. Once again, I'm staying away. Jets, Bucks, no thank you. Nothing that I want in that game. Broncos, Chargers is interesting. If you own the Broncos, you can always start them. I do think that the Chargers are a defense to be keeping a close eye on. I don't know that I would want to start them against the Broncos. They didn't really do much at all in week 1 with just 2 fantasy points against the Chiefs, but they will get the Giants, the Commanders, the Dolphins, the Colts, the Vikings, the Titans. There's some opportunity in coming weeks. The problem is they're just not really an upside team who gets a lot of turnovers, so they might have some potential matchups, but nothing that I really want to look at. Cowboys, Bears, I got a lot of heat last week because I didn't talk about the Cowboys, or at least I didn't recommend them. This is a bad defense for the Cowboys. I hope you guys realize that now, and it's a bad defense for the Bears, by the way, so we're staying away from both of these teams. Chiefs, Giants, once again, are you really going to go out and start the Chiefs against the Giants? Probably not. I'm not saying that Russell Wilson's going to do what he did this past week against the Chiefs, but the Chiefs might be a good real life defense for the most part, but they are not a good fantasy defense. And even if they're on the road here against the Giants and Russell Wilson, we have a mixed bag between weeks 1 and 2 for Russ. I'm staying away from this situation. I'm not starting the Chiefs whatsoever. The Lions and Ravens are both coming off of good performances. The Lions had 9 fantasy points this past week, and the Ravens had 15. But come on, this is going to be an offensive shootout. The last game of the week. No reason to start either of these teams here in week 3. There you guys have it. There are your must-start defenses and streams heading into week 3 of the fantasy season. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever moving into the week, be sure to drop me a comment. I will answer every comment on this video as the week progresses. And while you guys are down there, it does me a huge favor if you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And this is all we do here all year long, free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So Also, be sure to subscribe on the way out. When the videos and playlists pop up on the screen as the week progresses, we're going to have everything you could possibly need here on the channel to dominate week 3 of the season. So make sure you guys are checking out the videos throughout the week as well. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.